Our first order of business is to note that today many Ethiopians are celebrating the start of the new year under the Ethiopian calendar. So I want to wish our friends a very, very happy new year and many more to come. Many of the hearings that this subcommittee has held over the years, especially on Ethiopia, have been focusing on criticism, raising fundamental human rights issues in Ethiopia. Matter of fact, I introduced the bill back more than 10 years ago, the Ethiopia Human Rights Act. But today, however, strikes a far different tone, one not of criticism, but of commendation for the great strides Ethiopia has made since Prime Minister Abiy assumed authority in April of this year. Consider where we were just a year ago. A state of emergency existed and thousands of political prisoners languished in jail. A Cold War standoff existed between Ethiopia and its neighbor Eritrea. And of course, people in prisons were being tortured and mistreated in the most horrific of ways. As this subcommittee pointed out in the hearing we held in March of 2017, and I quote, increasingly, repressive policy have diminished political space and threatened to radicalize not only the political opposition, but also civil society by frustrating their ability to exercise their rights under law. In response to this, I introduced, along with original co-sponsors Karen Bass and Mike Coffin, my good friend and colleague, H-Res 128, a resolution supporting respect for human rights and encouraging inclusive governance in Ethiopia. The resolution set forth milestones which needed to be met and passed thanks to the leaderships of so many, including our chairman, Ed Royce, our ranking member, Elliot Engel, and of course, Kevin McCarthy and the Speaker, who ensured that the bill got to the floor in a timely fashion. But success of this measure was due in the largest part to the efforts of the Ethiopian diaspora community in the United States, which came together to demand that egregious human rights abuses immediately cease and that fundamental human rights must be promoted and protected for all in Ethiopia. Indeed, one of the greatest collateral benefits brought about by the passage of H-Res 128 is the political effectiveness of the Ethiopian American community, which provided a textbook civics lesson for all of us to admire and to emulate. It is thanks to their tireless efforts of contacting their congressional representatives, of providing very, very good insights as to what was going on the ground, and making the case in a persistent manner that helped spur Congress to action. Since assuming office, Prime Minister Abiy has begun to implement some of the very reforms that H-Res 128 called for. He has released thousands, I say again, thousands of political prisoners and lifted the state of emergency. But he has also reached out to the diaspora community, catalyzed an end to the schism that had plagued the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, and initiated an historic peace deal between Ethiopia and Eritrea this past July. Indeed, it is hoped that his domestic reforms will also inspire Eritrea, which remains a repressive regime, to undertake similar internal reforms. As an aside, Eritrea must reform. Some estimates put it at more than 10,000 prisoners being held unjustly, including 2 U.S. Embassy staff and one young Eritrean American named Siham al-Abadu. This then is an opportunity and an opportune moment for Eritrea as well to enact justice reforms, release political prisoners, and end coercive conscription policies. If that country did this, it would become, too, a critical U.S. strategic partner, and it could be professionalize its military so as to contribute to peacekeeping missions. Just a few weeks ago, Ranking Member Karen Bass and I visited, and our staff, the Ethiopian capital of Addis Ababa, where we met with Prime Minister Abiy and a very broad array, of individuals and groups, including His Holiness Abun Matthias I. One impression I had was a profound feeling of change and optimism, the likes of which I have not seen in Ethiopia ever. For what he has accomplished in less than half a year, the Prime Minister deserves praise and encouragement. Yet we still must keep in mind that expectations have been raised and the reforms he has begun must continue. For example, the notorious Charities and Society Proclamation and the Anti-Terrorism Proclamation, both passed in 2009, remain on the books and thus retain the potential to stifle legitimate civil society organizations and political speech. Many former prisoners and torture victims still demand justice. Ranking Member Bass and I met with several groups of torture victims in Addis, and what they described as having what they went through was absolutely horrific. One refrain we heard over and over, including from the Orthodox Church, is that there is a need for a truth and reconciliation in order for the country to move forward. There also needs to be an opportunity for people who have been displaced to return home. Catholic Archbishop Abraham Desta of Mekki recently brought to my attention that over 2.5 million people are internally displaced and require the government's immediate attention, especially by providing education for displaced children as the school year has already started. The economy needs to grow to provide jobs for many youth, including those who have participated in protests and civic disobedience. Reforms in the economic sector, including liberalization and deregulation, as well as an opening of economy to ethnic groups that have not been fully enfranchised, needs to continue. It also has been said that the reforms begun by Prime Minister Abiy represent a, quote, once-in-a-generation opportunity for Ethiopia. It is thus absolutely crucial that this opportunity be seized and in no way squandered. With this in mind, the United States must remain a strong partner with Ethiopia, someone we know that they can call upon, and I know we are, and we're so grateful to have our Assistant Secretary, who was the former ambassador to Ethiopia, here today. We collaborate on counterterrorism measures. We support and are grateful for Ethiopia's contribution to peacekeeping. Indeed, with more than 12,000 troops deployed between UN and AU missions, Ethiopia is the largest contributor to peacekeeping missions worldwide, and we must continue to encourage Ethiopia to participate in international military education training, or IMET, military professionalism programs. I also was encouraged by our conversations with Military Chief of Staff General Mekonnen on training Ethiopian peacekeepers on fighting the blight of human trafficking. Ethiopia is currently a Tier 2 country. As the author of the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, I will be strongly advocating that all anti-trafficking training be included in our IMET training for Ethiopian peacekeepers. And again, they're not Tier 1, which is the best tier, to try to help them make progress in that, in a broad range of trafficking issues in that country. I do believe, having met the man and having had an opportunity to engage in substantive discourse with him, Prime Minister Abiy is the right man for the right time and therefore deserving of our support. Finally, and speaking of support, I want to especially thank our ambassador, Mike Raynor, our Deputy Chief of Mission, Troy Fitcherell, and Political Officer Wilson Correll, as well as all of our embassy staff for the support that they gave for our delegation. Their professionalism and their dedication should give us great confidence that our relationship with the Prime Minister and his staff and country will remain strong, and we will move forward together. I'd like to yield to my good friend and colleague, Ms. Bass. Any opening comments?
Thank you.